So we know about the Epic of Gilgamesh. You know how a mad king 4,000 years ago angered the gods and they punished his people. Is it possible someday they'll write about Mad King Trump? Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. And our quote for the day from Franklin Roosevelt, caught it on one of the shows over the weekend. It was, I think it might have been Fareed Zakaria. Anyway, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. FDR. We've got a lot to talk about today. First of all, the Mad King Donald, who thinks that if only 100,000 Americans die, he's done a great job. I mean, I'm just boggled that the media is not dealing with this. Like, say what? I mean, the numbers are completely different all around the world. I mean, you've got 3,000 people dead in China. You've got 300 people, fewer than 300 people dead in South Korea. They've got this thing under control. And in Italy now it's over 10,000. And in Spain, they're having a crisis, but it's not 100,000 dead people. And some of the estimates are that because Trump did nothing for 2 months or longer, when he knew what was coming and he knew what was going to happen, and he still hasn't shut down the red states. And he's diverting ventilators away from blue states down to Florida. Ron DeSantis gets all he wants. He still hasn't shut down his state, to the best of my knowledge. And he had the beaches open for holiday. I mean, it's just insane. So anyhow, I want to talk about that. Mark Scribner is going to be here in our second hour. He's with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's going to explain to us why we shouldn't be relying on government to help us. We should be relying on the charity of billionaires and big corporations. That's going to be interesting. Of course, that's the Competitive Enterprise Institute's shtick. And in our third hour, Alex Lawson, our old friend from Social Security Works, guy who fills in for me from time to time, is going to drop by and talk about the stimulus bill, or whatever you want to call this thing, and what its impact is going to be with regard to Social Security. And that's not just for people who are currently retired, but also, is the Social Security tax suspension that's in that bill going to hurt the program long term so that younger people will not have, for retirement, what older people have? And so, anyhow, that's pretty much, what we're going to be talking about today, although I've got some great geeky science stuff for you, and there's a lot in the news, just in general, a lot of general other news. But over the weekend, I was, reading history. I want to get into some George Washington history today as well. But there's this story. It's 4,000 years old. It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was the first king who built the first city-state in what we now call Iraq. It was called Ur back then, and the city was Uruk. And the northern Iraq was covered with cedar forests 4,000 years ago. And Gilgamesh went into those forests and cut them down and used that wood to build his giant city, this massive city. Now, in the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is that the god of the forest, Humbuba, was really upset about Gilgamesh coming to cut down the forest, tried to stop him, and Gilgamesh cut his head off, killed him, and then took out the forest. And in revenge for this, now, Gilgamesh not only built this city, but he also built a massive irrigation system, moving the water out of the Euphrates River so that they could have, hundreds of thousands of acres of barley. Turns out, if you irrigate crops like that over and over and over the same way, without changing your patterns of growth and irrigation, the soil just starts accumulating more and more salt. And in legend, this was the punishment by the gods for Gilgamesh cutting Humbuba's head off, was that their fields were, quote, turned to white. That was the description of one of the people who was alive at the time. And so if Gilgamesh's epic was to be written today, right, if we were to write someday, 1,000 years from now, people are going to look back on this point in history, or hundreds of years from now, and say, oh, that was a consequential turning point in the history of the human race. So here's what I think the story would go like. The people of Earth pulled out of the depths of the planet its blood, ancient sunlight that had been stored by plants in the form of fossil fuels, and they burned it to power a great civilization, just like Gilgamesh did with the trees. The people burned so much ancient sunlight into the sky that the atmosphere began to die. People were dying in plagues of cancer and asthma. But these warnings from the earth were ignored. The gods protecting the earth warned us by beginning a great warming, changing the face of Arctic regions and bringing extreme floods and droughts and wildfires to the planet. And those warnings were ignored too. So the gods said, we must stop humankind from poisoning our Mother Earth. Let us send a plague that will strike dead their wise elders and brokers of political power. Surely that will get their attention and cause them to cease their violence against us. So they sent the Queen of Disease, wearing her royal crown, to aid Mother Earth. The people called her Corona, and she struck down the elders, sickening the rest of the people and only sparing the young. It was to remind them of the Passover story, of the plague of the firstborn, of the warnings that were not heeded, that there would be death and wailing and gnashing of teeth. In response, the people sheltered in place, and the great cities of earth became quiet. They realized with horror how the false god of neoliberalism, had destroyed their resilience and their ability to care for each other solely to enrich a handful of oligarchs. It's as if Gaia herself designed the coronavirus. All across the planet, carbon-burning industrial and transportation activity have ground to a near halt, while pollution levels have collapsed. So much oil is not being burned that countries in the world are running out of places to store it. They literally are all over the planet. And the one industry that is thriving right now, the internet, was the first industry to embrace being carbon-free. In some distant time, the story of how arrogant King Trump caused the gods to turn against us with his lies and procrastination, and millions died. And is that story, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, going to be about how, a sick and twisted mad king destroyed his people? Or will it be the story of humanity accepting the warning, turning its back on twisted, evil leaders, and stopping poisoning the earth? Ultimately, that choice is ours.